My wife and I always dreamed of leaving the city behind. After years of saving every dollar we could, we finally bought an old Victorian house tucked away in the mountains of West Virginia. It was suspiciously cheap. Looking back now, I know exactly why. If someone offered me that house for free today, I'd rather spend the rest of my life sleeping in my car. Because some houses don't want new owners. They want new victims. My name is Ethan Carter, and this happened 6 months ago. My wife Sarah and I had spent almost 5 years living in a cramped apartment outside Boston. We both worked remotely, so there was nothing keeping us in the city anymore. Sarah had always dreamed of waking up to the sound of birds instead of traffic. She wanted a quiet life, surrounded by mountains, forests, and fresh air. One night, while scrolling through real estate listings, she suddenly looked up at me with the biggest smile I'd seen in years. "Ethan, I found it." The listing almost looked fake. A 3-story Victorian house, a wraparound porch, a huge backyard, dense forest on every side. And the price? It was less than half of what similar houses in West Virginia normally sold for. I kept refreshing the page, convinced there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. Within 3 weeks, the house was ours. The drive from Boston took almost 9 hours. The farther south we drove, the fewer cars we saw. Gas stations became rare. Small towns disappeared. Eventually, even our phone signal vanished. Sarah laughed. "Guess we're officially off the grid." I smiled, but something felt strange. The GPS stopped updating. The same narrow road seemed to stretch on forever. Towering pine trees lined both sides of the road, blocking most of the sunlight, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. I rolled down the window. There wasn't a single bird. No insects. No wind. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you instinctively lower your voice. When the house finally came into view, we both stopped talking. It was beautiful. Old white wooden walls, tall black windows, a steep slate roof. It looked like something out of a postcard. If you ignored one thing, it looked completely abandoned. The front yard hadn't been touched in years. Dead vines wrapped around the porch railing. Several upstairs windows were cracked, and hanging from the porch ceiling was an old wind chime. It wasn't moving, even though the trees around it were gently swaying. A pickup truck was parked outside. The realtor stepped out, holding a ring of old brass keys. He didn't smile. He barely even looked at us. After handing me the keys, he asked me to sign a few papers on the hood of his truck. I looked toward the house. "Has anyone lived here recently?" He hesitated, then quietly said, "Not for a long time." "Why?" He stared at the front door for several seconds before answering. "People don't usually stay." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he climbed into his truck, rolled down the window one last time, and said something I'll never forget. "If either of you hears knocking after midnight," he paused, "pretend you didn't." Then he drove away. Sarah rolled her eyes. Realtors will say anything to make an old house seem interesting. I wanted to believe that, so I unlocked the front door. The second it opened, a freezing gust of air rushed past us. It smelled like wet earth, burnt herbs, and something rotten, something I couldn't identify. Sarah immediately covered her nose. "God, what is that smell?" I stepped inside. The hardwood floor groaned beneath my feet. Every room was coated in a thick layer of dust. Furniture was still covered with old white sheets. The entire house felt untouched, like no one had lived there in decades. But for some reason, it didn't feel empty. It felt like someone was waiting for us. I tried convincing myself it was just an old house. Old houses make strange noises. They smell weird. They settle. They creak. That's what I kept telling myself. Looking back, I think the house wanted us to believe that. The first day went by surprisingly fast. Sarah unpacked the kitchen while I carried boxes upstairs. For a few hours, everything felt normal, almost peaceful, until dinner. Sarah had picked up fresh vegetables from a grocery store about 30 miles away. She sliced open the first tomato and immediately dropped the knife. The inside wasn't red. It was pitch black. Tiny white maggots poured onto the cutting board. "That's impossible," she whispered. We checked the potatoes, the onions, the carrots. Every single vegetable looked perfectly fresh on the outside, but completely rotten inside. It didn't make any sense. We had bought them less than 3 hours earlier. Sarah forced a laugh. "I guess we're ordering pizza." I reached for my phone. No signal. Not even one bar. The house had somehow become a dead zone. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The wind outside grew louder. Around midnight, the power flickered once, then went out completely. Sarah lit a few candles while I searched for the breaker box. It took me longer than it should have. The hallway suddenly looked unfamiliar, like parts of the house had shifted. I eventually found the basement door. The breaker was right beside it. As I reached for the switch, I heard something. A soft scrape. Coming from the other side of the basement door. It sounded like someone slowly dragging a wooden rocking chair across the concrete floor. Back and forth. Back and forth. I stood there for nearly a minute, listening. The sound suddenly stopped. Then, 3 slow knocks. I didn't open the door. For some reason, I couldn't move. When the lights came back on, the sound disappeared. I told Sarah it was probably old pipes. Even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe my own explanation. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke up. Or, at least, I thought I did. A woman's voice was whispering my name. "Ethan." It sounded distant, almost like it was coming through the walls. Then it whispered again, "Come outside." Without thinking, I got out of bed, unlocked the back door, and walked barefoot into the freezing yard. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even fully awake. It felt like I was following instructions I couldn't ignore. The shovel was already lying in the grass, waiting for me. I picked it up and started digging. One shovel after another. Faster. Harder. Like someone underneath the ground was running out of time. I don't know how long I was out there. 5 minutes? Maybe an hour. Then I heard Sarah screaming, "Ethan!" The moment she grabbed my shoulder, everything snapped back. I looked down. There was a hole nearly 6 feet deep. My hands were bleeding. My fingernails were packed with dirt. I stared at Sarah. "What happened?" She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You've been digging for almost an hour." I laughed nervously. "No, I was asleep." She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed into the hole. At the very bottom, something pale was sticking out of the dirt. It looked exactly like human fingers. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Then, the fingers slowly curled, as if something beneath the ground had just realized we had found it. Neither of us said a word. We just stood there, staring into the hole. The fingers slowly disappeared beneath the dirt, not by sinking, but as if something underneath had pulled them down. Sarah grabbed my arm so hard it actually hurt. "We're filling this back in." I didn't argue. Neither of us wanted to know what was buried down there. We shoveled dirt back into the hole as fast as we could. By sunrise, it was gone. Or at least, that's what we thought. The rest of the morning felt strangely normal. Almost too normal. Sarah made coffee. I unpacked the last few boxes upstairs. We didn't talk about the previous night. It felt easier to pretend it hadn't happened. Until Sarah called my name. "Ethan, you need to see this." I walked into the kitchen. The muddy footprints we'd left after digging were gone. Every single one. The floor was spotless, almost polished, but there was something else. A new set of footprints, bare feet, much smaller than ours. They started at the basement door, crossed the kitchen, and ended right beside Sarah's chair. There were no footprints leading away, just ending there, as if someone had been standing beside her, watching. That afternoon, I decided to inspect the basement. I told myself I was looking for mice, or broken pipes, anything that made sense. The wooden door groaned as I pulled it open. Cold air rushed out. The smell was unbearable. Wet soil, burned herbs, rotting flowers. The basement steps disappeared into darkness. I turned on my flashlight. The beam barely reached the bottom. Every step creaked beneath my weight. When I reached the floor, I realized something. The basement was much larger than it should have been. From outside, the house wasn't nearly big enough to have a room this size. The walls were lined with dusty shelves, hundreds of old glass jars. Inside each one, dead flowers, black liquid, and strange bundles of dried herbs tied together with red string. In the center of the room sat an old wooden rocking chair. It moved, very slowly, back and forth, back and forth. There was no wind, no open windows, nothing touching it. I stood completely still. Then my flashlight landed on the wall behind the chair. Someone had carved hundreds of names into the wood. Some were decades old, others looked fresh. At the very bottom, I found two names that made my blood run cold. Ethan Carter, Sarah Carter. The carving looked old, as if our names had been there for years. My heart started pounding. I ran upstairs. "Sarah!" No answer. I searched the kitchen. Nothing. The living room, empty. The bedroom, empty. Then I heard her voice, very faint, coming from outside. I looked through the back window. Sarah was standing in the exact spot where I'd been digging. She wasn't moving. She was just staring at the ground. I ran outside. "Sarah!" She didn't react. When I finally reached her, she whispered something so quietly, I almost missed it. "She's still alive." "What?" Sarah slowly pointed toward the ground. "She wants us to open it." Before I could respond, Sarah collapsed. Her body hit the ground so hard I thought she'd broken her neck. I rushed over. She wasn't breathing. For almost 10 terrifying seconds, she had no pulse. Then suddenly, her eyes opened. She looked directly at me, smiled, and in a voice that wasn't hers, she whispered, "You're digging in the wrong place." Sarah's smile disappeared. Then she blinked, like she'd just woken up. "Ethan." "What happened?" I grabbed her shoulders. "You don't remember what you just said?" She looked confused. "Said what?" I didn't answer, because I already knew. Whatever had spoken to me wasn't Sarah. I carried her back inside. She insisted she felt fine, but something about her had changed. She barely spoke. She kept staring out the windows, as if someone was standing in the woods, watching us, waiting. That night, neither of us wanted to sleep. We made coffee, turned every light on, left the TV running, anything to stay awake. By 2 a.m, Sarah could barely keep her eyes open. "I'll just rest for 5 minutes." The moment she closed her eyes, every light in the house went out. At the exact same second. The TV, the lamps, even my flashlight. Darkness swallowed everything. Then, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, bare feet, walking across the ceiling. One step after another. Sarah's eyes suddenly opened, but they weren't looking at me. They were fixed on the hallway. She whispered, "She's here." Before I could say anything, Sarah stood up and started walking. Not normally, slowly, like someone was pulling invisible strings tied to her body. She walked into the hallway, then stopped in front of the basement door. Without touching it, The old wooden door slowly creaked open by itself. The smell hit us instantly. Wet soil, burned herbs, rotting flesh, and something sweet, like dead flowers. Sarah smiled, then walked downstairs. I followed her with a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other. Still, no signal. The basement looked different. The shelves were gone. The jars had disappeared. The room looked older, much older. Candles burned all around us, but I hadn't lit them. Someone else had. At the center of the room, the rocking chair was still moving. Back and forth. Back and forth. This time, someone was sitting in it. A woman. Long black hair covered her face. Her skin looked gray, almost like stone. She rocked slowly, never stopping. Sarah walked toward her, like she recognized her. I grabbed Sarah's arm. The woman's rocking stopped instantly. Without lifting her head, she spoke. Her voice sounded like dozens of people whispering together. You shouldn't have woken him. The room suddenly became ice cold. Every candle went out. Then, the woman slowly raised her face. Her eyes were completely empty. Not black, not white, just deep holes. And inside those holes, I could see people. Hundreds of them, screaming, trying to escape. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Then she smiled. Her jaw stretched far wider than any humans should. You came here looking for a dream, she whispered, so I gave you one. Everything around me disappeared. The basement, the house, Sarah, gone. I was standing outside, morning sunlight, birds singing. The house looked beautiful, perfect. Sarah ran onto the porch, laughing. Ethan, we did it! It finally feels like home. For 1 second, I believed it. Then I noticed something. The wind chime. It wasn't moving. Even though every tree around it was bending in the wind, my stomach dropped. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't casting a shadow. Neither was I. The woman's voice echoed behind me. You're still asleep. The perfect world around me began to crack, like broken glass. And through those cracks, I could see the real house. Dark, rotting, covered in blood. Then I heard Sarah screaming. Not the Sarah standing beside me, the real Sarah. Somewhere, deep beneath the house, still alive, still trapped. And I realized the most horrifying thing of all. We had never escaped the first night. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The beautiful house, or the rotting one. The sunlight, or the endless darkness. Sarah, or whatever was pretending to be Sarah. Then I heard her scream again. Ethan, please! It was faint, like she was trapped beneath hundreds of feet of earth. I closed my eyes. The moment I opened them, I was back in the basement. The candles were burning again. The old woman was gone. Sarah was lying on the floor, unconscious. I picked her up and ran upstairs. Every door in the house slammed shut, one after another. Bang, bang, bang. The windows shattered. The lights exploded. The entire house began to shake. From every room, I heard whispers. Not one voice, hundreds. Some were crying, some were laughing. Some kept repeating the same sentence. Don't wake up. Stay with us. I kicked the front door as hard as I could. It wouldn't move. I tried a chair. Nothing. It felt like the house itself was holding it shut. Then I remembered the hole I'd dug. I ran to the backyard. It was there again, except this time, it was already open. Much deeper than before. Something was climbing out. Not quickly. Slowly. One hand, then another, then a face. It wasn't the old woman, it was an old man. His skin looked gray, his clothes were covered in dirt. He looked at me with terrified eyes. "You have to wake up," he whispered. Before I could help him, dozens of pale hands reached up from the darkness and dragged him back underground. His scream echoed for what felt like forever. Then, silence. Behind me, Sarah finally opened her eyes. "Ethan, I know how to leave." She pointed toward the house. "She feeds on fear. If we believe this place is real, we stay. If we wake ourselves up, she loses us." I didn't understand. "How do we wake up?" Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We have to stop fighting the nightmare." She grabbed my hand. We both closed our eyes. The whispers became deafening. The house shook violently. Something screamed directly into my ear. I felt freezing fingers wrap around my neck. Everything inside me wanted to open my eyes. I didn't. Then, everything went silent. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital bed. Bright lights, machines beeping. A nurse was calling my name. Sarah was in the bed beside mine, alive, crying. The doctor told us we'd been found unconscious inside our new house 3 days earlier. Carbon monoxide. A damaged furnace had filled the entire house with poisonous gas. He said the hallucinations were caused by oxygen deprivation. That explanation sounded reasonable. For a while, we believed it. We sold the house 2 months later. Neither of us ever wanted to see it again. Last week, I received an email from the county office. It simply read, "We're trying to identify the previous owners of your property." Attached was a photograph taken in 1984. It showed a family standing on the front porch. A husband, a wife, 2 children. Behind them, looking through the upstairs window, stood the same gray woman we had seen in the basement. No one else seemed to notice her. Then I looked closer. Standing beside that family were Sarah and me, wearing the exact same clothes we'd worn on the day we moved in. The photo had been taken 42 years before either of us was born. I stared at it for almost an hour. Then my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. There was no text, only a single photo. It was taken from inside that house. Someone was standing in the upstairs bedroom, looking down at me. I zoomed in. The person in the window was me, smiling.